Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Thanks for recording today. We are talking about a variety of different topics, but we are really heavy into rule, law, ethics, compliance issues today. We'll save some of the coaching and business building for the seminars that are coming up. So that will be my first plea with everyone. I hope that you have RSVP'd. If you haven't, we need your head count on what location you're going to attend for our annual kickoff meetings. Your choices are January 24th in Salt Lake or February 30th in St. George. I'm sorry, January 30th or February 1st in Park City. So make sure that you attend. If the word hasn't leaked out yet, we will likely be unveiling a new buyer's guide also at that meeting, and you're not going to want to miss it. So that's really, really important and critical that everyone attend. So hope to see you there. Okay, today we thought the division newsletter came out, and actually this was Mike had the idea that we would probably go through and actually Marc delivered some of this message in the Park City sales meeting, which was in person yesterday. Jessica, I see your comment about getting the training for the buyer guide then. Well, yeah, the initial piece of what the buyer guide is, and yeah, that will certainly be delivered. I've got some high hopes here, but I hope we have draft copies for everyone. But we'll see how that goes. Right now, the building of the buyer's guide reminds me of Christmas shopping the modern way, where you sift through dozens and dozens of Amazon packages every day that keep showing up. And Travis delivered like 5 boxes yesterday from Metro Mountain Mortgage. Title's delivering some. I mean, there's boxes of cool stuff everywhere. Just got to put it all together. Thanks for the boxes, Travis.
You're welcome.
It was great too. All right, so let's go to due on sale discussion, and then we can do. Isn't that what we want to start with, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm get a running start at this, and Marc helped me out with the timeline. But when Marc and I attended the IDW, which is IDW is the instructor workshop the Division of Real Estate puts on once a year for every CE instructor. We were up in Park City. I would say there's probably 60 people in the room, maybe something like that.
About right, 60, 70. Yeah.
Yeah. So the division, Johnny, the director, the Katie, the investigators, her team are all there and presenting to the instructors. It was curious to me. I've been going to this for 22 years. You got 22 years, like a family reunion. So at the back of the room, I was saying hi to Johnny before we got started, and I couldn't help but bring up the topic of the day, which is seller financing and due on sale. And he was like, what do you mean it's a problem? I was like, really? You guys need this on your front radar right now. And if you put a timeline to this, the newsletter, I think they got on it in November. They wrote the newsletter and it just came out. So clearly, Johnny was listening to that discussion. And I think he got a lot of instructors coming up to him and talking about the concerns of this. We have had classes internally already on seller financing, and we've done a lot of that. So this is probably a little bit of a review. And Travis is here, of course, an expert from the lender's point of view to weigh in on why these due on sales are so important. But do you want to pull that up, Mike? Maybe we could just look at that really quick. This will refresh us on what a due on sale clause is. Let me know when you've got.
Gotcha.
Yep, share screen. Yeah, there it is. Okay. And for those who are on computer, if you're like me, you've got to get that to fit the window and size it right. For those who are not on, I'll read it to you. But down there in that paragraph where it says due on sell clause, keep going down a little bit. Yeah, right there. Due on sell clause, also known as acceleration or alienation clause. For anyone who's recently gone to get their broker's license or remembers anything from school, you'll remember the acceleration or alienation clauses or lender clauses that are put into mortgage language that allows the lender to accelerate the payment, or in other words, become due immediately. And this is normally a trigger event that something happens. Something caused the lender to have the right to call the loan due. And so the acceleration clause is really a bigger, issue than what triggered it. Well, it was because it was sold. All right. That's the trigger that allowed the lender then to exercise their alienation or acceleration clause. Hey, Travis, I think it's appropriate for you to explain to everybody why it's important from the lender's point of view to have this anyway. Why does the lender, what's the benefit of a lender to have alienation or acceleration clauses and these due on sell clauses? What do they get out of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I tend to overcomplicate it. And here's the simple answer, guys. When the lender enters into a note and deed of trust, they're securing the property. 50% of that guarantee is the property and the property ownership, right? That's what that's why we get an appraisal. That's why we have collateral value. That's why we have purchase price, right? As an example, if we go in, we want to make sure that home is worth X value. And the promise to repay, your promissory note secures the deed of trust, right? Or your deed of trust secures your promissory note. And that's the client's promise to pay. So when we think of it in the terms of collateral and what the lender is willing to loan against, that's why it's so critically important to the lender, because I promised to repay the loan that they had provided me on that collateral. But I also want to note something. The acceleration clause or due on sale clause is not only in the sale of a property. It is, but it's in the context of deed transfer. Right. And there are some provisions in the deed of trust that allow a deed of transfer without an acceleration or alienation clause. But they're very rare, and it's typically in the effect of deceased, et cetera, et cetera. But it's so critically important that we get the idea of deed transfer and the lender's right for acceleration. It happens, it's important, and we have to pay attention to that.
So why are we seeing more of this now than ever?
For a couple of reasons. I get an email, Will, maybe once every other week now. There for a while, it was a few times per week of, gosh, the lender wants to have a due and sale because they want to accelerate the note and get a higher interest rate. Well, no, lenders don't go through that process of saying, gosh, I want to go pick on Travis Hardman in Park City, Utah because of an acceleration clause. And I can get a higher interest rate because his interest rate is 2.5 and I can get a 7.5. That's the perception and the way we think, but that has nothing to do with it. The acceleration clause has been out there for forever. And think about eminent domain. We're seeing it more now because of the inverse relationship and the quantity of loans and sellers that are trying to position themselves to potentially have an assumable mortgage when they don't, right? And that is their ability to transfer that title over to a new borrower, a new buyer at a significantly discount rate. And the lender they just don't compute that way, right? So it has nothing to do with the lender wanting to get a higher interest rate on that property. It's the fact that it's now heightened and there's this giant magnifying glass on folks that are transferring titles, and that's the lender's ability to secure that lien or that instrument. That's why.
Yeah.
Travis, do you think lenders are getting any pressure from investors or from their management to take a closer look at these transfers that might trigger due on sale clause because there are so many lower interest rate loans out there and there's been a big swing in the interest rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I shared this article with you, Mark. It was about a real estate REIT. And real estate REITs and mortgage-backed securities are sold in what's called a tranche. And I won't get down the rabbit hole too far here. That tranche of real estate portfolio is at X credit, right? So think AAA credit, high FICO, low loan to value, secure instrument. And those lenders are securing those for a period of time. And their return on investment is typically that 7-year window. Well, when you have a runoff on that portfolio, that runoff is indicative, again, of due and sale clause, right? When we transfer that title, and that quantity of volume runs off that portfolio. So there's a lot of pressure, not from management, called the Wells Fargos or the Chases of the world. It's more heightened within the market itself and those that are securitizing mortgage-backed securities. That's the pressure that they're under, is that rapid runoff on portfolio is what they're trying to protect themselves of.
Got it. Thank you.
So obviously this is leading us into what does this mean for us as agents and the risk that our buyer or sellers can inadvertently get into, and then our exposure to this. And we brought this up in seller Look, I hope everyone is reminded about our internal policies. Let's just remind everybody what our policies are. Marc, do you want to just what you said in Park City sales meeting yesterday? Do you want to remind everybody what our policy is when it comes to seller financing, particularly around wraps and our position?
Sure. The first kind of the permitted tranche is if the seller owns the property free and clear, or will own the property free and clear at closing, then that's a prime transaction, if you will, for a seller financing transaction. And we can be involved in that transaction as agents on either the buy side or the sell side, as long as our client has representation, legal counsel. A lot of that stems from, if you look at the seller financing addendum that we have from the state of Utah, approved by the Utah Attorney General, it says at the very top that real estate professionals are not licensed or authorized to advise, I'm paraphrasing, but advise the client, the buyer or seller, in regard to, or with respect to, the seller financing aspects of any transaction. Therefore, it seems advisable, it is advisable for us to encourage our clients to have legal counsel if we are going to engage in a seller financing transaction on either side where the seller owns the property free and clear. Now, part two of that is that if the seller does not own the property free and clear, or will not own the property free and clear at closing, in other words, they're going to do a wrap, they're not going to pay off the underlying mortgage, we are not allowed as agents to be involved in that transaction. Obviously, it involves a due on sale clause in that underlying mortgage that is not going to be paid off, and we're aware that it's not going to be paid off at closing. And the parties are going to attempt to wrap a second mortgage around the underlying mortgage. It's fraught with all sorts of legal liability for the buyers and sellers, and all sorts of negative ramifications. One scenario is played out in the division newsletter. But by getting involved with it on the agent side at the brokerage level, we've determined that we don't want to be part of those transactions, and therefore we have the policy that we have in place. Sorry, Will, it's a little long-winded, but
it's all right. Okay.
Hey, Will.
Yeah.
I got a text, and I won't read the whole text to you, but the text says, "Are there any laws to protect the seller or only the lender?" Guys, you need to be clear about one thing. The seller is in violation of their deed of trust. They're actually violating an agreement to repay. So no, there's no law to protect the seller. And I understand there's a longer text here, but the second piece of my response is, when we think about the law that protects the lender, which is the ability to repay law under Dodd-Frank, that means that when we execute a note or a deed of trust, we have agreed to repay that note. And that's why that acceleration clause is there. So if I wasn't clear about that, my apologies, but that's a really good question in the sense of protection.
Nice. Okay, I got to put a little humor in. It's okay to laugh, right? But already, let's see how smart you guys have been paying attention. There's been a word that has been used by Travis and by Marc that I don't know that I've heard very many times in my life. And it's definite. I had to look it up. Yeah, Jessica's like, humor, please. I had to look it up and go, what does that even mean? And it means in structured finance, a blank is one of the number of related securities offered as part of the same transaction. Does anyone know what word that Travis used and Mark used? Anyone? You're like, Will, why is this funny? Well, this is the joy of hanging out with legally minded folk. And pretty soon you're going to start talking this way. You're going to say things like, such as, you'll say things like, but not limited to. And you might even use the word, are you ready? Tranche. Tranche. What the heck is a tranche? A trench? Is it a trench? What is it? I had to look it up. Anyway, tranche, you guys, that is the word of the day. You try to use this in a sentence with anybody outside this call and see what their reaction is. In structured finance, a tranche is one of a number of related securities offered as part of the same transaction. In a financial sense of the word, each bond is different slice of the deal's risk. Tranche.
Well, Will, Hollywood actually did a really great job of describing and defining what a tranche is.
Yeah, they did. What's a tranche?
In The Big Short, there's a whole scene where they describe a tranche, and it's a French word.
Oh, is it a French word?
I know that because I watched the movie.
Mike is flexing over there. Well
I
done.
love it.
Wow.
I love it. All right. Yeah, The Big Short is one of those documentary kind of movies we should all have seen, right? Teach you a lot about lending. Let's go down on that page, Mike, a little bit further to make sure that we understand what the division is saying about all this, just to put a bow on the due on sale and risk.
Okay.
There's a section there towards the end, the agent's role. Van is saying in that big paragraph is essentially, a deal that's enticing. The seller has a 2.8% interest rate. The current rates are at 7.5%. It's really enticing to think that the seller could wrap a mortgage, continue to make their payment. Of course, the trigger is, we've talked about this, that Marc just brought it up. Is there pressures on lenders to discover more of these due on sales? They likely are, and the technology of today is triggering when a beneficiary is changed on a title policy, that the beneficiary is notified. So the lender, ABC Lending, that loaned all this money under the 2.8 years ago, all of a sudden gets a new policy reminder that you're a beneficiary of a new title insurance policy. Well, guess what? That's a trigger that a sale happened. Okay. Now they're going to call that thing due. Their alienation is going to kick in. And the unsuspecting real estate agent who participated in this is going to get swept away into some in a losing battle, likely, right? And that's what the division is saying. So I've highlighted as the agent involved, just below where your cursor, that's my cursor. Oh, that's your cursor right there. As the agent involved, did you adequately inform and notify the parties of this possibility? And we would add, first of all, we won't do a wrap. All right. There are no wrap scenarios in Berkshire Hathaway that we would allow. It doesn't matter whether they have an attorney or not. The risk and liability here is pretty easy to understand, and we can't be a part of that. So we don't allow them. In any case, this is the division's stance, and I would predict that this will get more stringent as the ripple effect of the market and the change in the market, and these due on sales are called due. I'll bet you this starts to change.
Yeah, which leads to Scott's question in the chat. Is there some data that has shown that there is an uptick on these situations, the calling them due, the acceleration?
Travis?
Yeah, can I take that?
Yeah.
Great question, Scott, because I get trapped here in a corner when that question is asked, and let me explain why. The simple answer is no. There's no empirical data that I can point you to that says X percentage of securitized mortgage transactions, right, those securities, are being called due. I can tell you, though, from a servicing standpoint, yes. When we talk to servicers and those that are holding notes on their balance sheet, this is a really big topic. for all of the risk that it puts on the servicer itself. And then again, back to those buckets of loans or those tranches of loans that are out there for REITs, et cetera. But there is no direct reporting because the reporting would have to come from each of those servicers. And that's more indicative of runoff on their portfolio than it is much of anything else. But if we're talking about it, the state's talking about it, and at the national level, we're discussing these topics, then where there's smoke, there's a lot of fire.
Yeah, I feel like we were, as an organization and probably even as a Utah realtor community, we were kind of cued in to this issue by multiple national articles. We weren't the ones that we were responding to everybody else talking about this issue, if I remember right.
I think it's going to become easier. I think we're going to start seeing this. It's always a ripple effect. It takes years sometimes for these things to come up. So, all right, you guys ready to switch gears? You want to do lead-based paint? Let's go on to that one. I think this is important. You might want to pull that up, Mike, because it's got a, this is a warning to Utah brokers that there are imminent inspections. So you'll find this, I think, curious. Yep, right there at the top. Recently, the EPA has sending notices to Utah real estate brokerages of imminent inspections for compliance with lead-based paint disclosure rule. There's the section. These notices were usually received 2 weeks before the audit and require a list of residential transactions over the last 3 years, including all types of housing. So the EPA inspections can include up to 10 individuals, and the violations could lead to penalties up to $19,000 per violation. It's not a small thing. So, all right, from here, Mike, I've done a lot of talking. Do you want to just remind everybody what our responsibilities are on this?
Yeah, of course, we know that there, yeah, I'll take over. You know that there's sellers' responsibilities here, obviously, and landlords. But we care most about what our responsibilities are because this issue, regardless of the seller's actions, will fall on us if we let it. So it's saying agents must ensure that seller and landlords are aware of their obligations, proper disclosures, signatures, and warning pamphlet, opportunity to conduct appropriate inspections. Lease and sale contracts contain proper language and signatures, which is our warning statement, and retention of these documents, which is what we do. So if the seller is not doing it, so this is a good example of what happens if we fail to comply. So if a seller or landlord fails to comply, the agent is still responsible if the landlord or seller fails to comply with this problem. And I mean, when we sell a home, we automatically take on the burden of disclosing because we know it's easiest for us to do that. But if they don't, it's still on us. However, an agent is not responsible for information withheld by the seller or leaser. But I think we did tackle this, obviously, where we kind of I think on the MLS, we're auto inputting that lead-based paint disclosure on your build date. What if the seller and agent fail to comply? Failure to comply does not invalidate leasing and sales contracts, but there are very steep penalties. Possibility of triple damages, potential civil and criminal penalties, and 3.88 disclosure requirements for seller and leaseors. I have no idea what that means. Oh, that's 24 CFR 3.88. Also don't know what that means. If any of the disclosure activities identified in the paragraph of this section occurs after the purchaser or leasee has provided an offer to purchase or lease the housing, the seller or leaseor shall complete the required disclosure activities prior to accepting the purchaser's or leasee's offer and will allow the purchaser or leasee an opportunity to review the information. So they're saying it's never too late to disclose, and that regardless of when that time frame is, it is the time to disclose. But it is not a reason that someone can back out, use that as an opportunity to negate a contract.
Yeah, so we're not off the hook, clearly, because we would know. And because of our expertise and license, we do not get to say, to play the ignorance card. We're trained on it. We are licensed. That proves that we're trained on it. So we have the duty of disclosure. So very good. The division was kind of interested about this because it's a new emphasis. This might be an administrative thing. Do you remember, Mark? Why all of a sudden an uptick in these inspections of lead-based paint all of a sudden?
I don't know why we got into that exactly. I know the EPA just released its new, in October released its new lead-based paint pamphlet. And so that particular disclosure to buyers had to be updated. It's been updated. It was updated back in October in our system. So we have the latest and greatest pamphlet, but anytime they update something, maybe it's an opportunity to reemphasize its importance and make sure everybody is on making the appropriate disclosures. No other reason than the uptick. That's the only significant event that happened.
Okay, good. That's what okay, it makes sense. Should we answer Scott's question there? Mark, do you want to explain?
I don't see it. What is it? Can you read it to me?
Scott, do you want to verbalize it?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mike.
It says, Mark, can you explain why this could be legal problem for both BHHS and agents? And he's referring to the due on sale clause wraps. And he's referring to us prohibiting wraps.
Right, for very much the same reason as the division's pointing out the disclosure obligations. I mean, if the buyer and seller, if you read the scenario that they lay out, it has potential very significant ramifications for the buyer and seller. The seller would likely have used the funds they received to purchase a new home, won't have the funds to pay off the loan. The buyer may or may not qualify for a loan to pay off the seller's loan. And they're going to look for someone else to bring in and say that we weren't advised properly about this due on sale clause. We didn't have any idea that it existed. Our agent should have protected us. And obviously the name Berkshire Hathaway being a presumed deep pocket, they're going to bring in the brokerage and they're going to bring in the agent saying that you should have told us, you should have protected us.
This is where I don't get it. I don't get it, guys. I don't get why in the world we don't prohibit this, because Travis is right. This is where the light bulb did not go off for me until I got this issue. Okay. The agent becomes aware of a recorded contract with terms that the seller agreed to with their lender. And then the agent is then going to participate in structuring a transaction to violate the terms of that contract, openly violate it, right? Because the contract says if you sell the property, the note is due in full. The agent knows that, right? And so we're going to willingly participate in a transaction and structure one and then get compensated for it.
All the while we have our fiduciary duties of reasonable care.
Yeah.
You're right. It doesn't seem to align. And we went through a big discussion of whether or not we were participating in fraud, which was an interesting conversation. We won't go down that road right now, but it's arguably to some of us, the agent and the brokerage participating in a fraudulent transaction with our buyer.
Yeah.
Or seller.
Yeah. That's right. Well, that's kind of where the light bulb went off for me. And I think we talked about this in the Sellerify class, but a good reminder for everybody. All right. You want to switch gears, talk about some stipulations?
I love a good stipulation.
Hey, Mark, give us the legal, for 2 decades, I read, well, let's be clear here. I've been in the real estate business now, guys, for 33 years, right? This industry for 33 years. But for 20 of those years, I had no idea what the word stipulate. We read it in the newsletter. It says in a stipulation order, in a stipulation order, in a stipulation order. And we read this all the time. Mark, explain what that means. If the parties stipulated, what did they do?
Well, they essentially agreed to a resolution. They stipulate to a oftentimes it doesn't necessarily involve, it depends on the forum, doesn't necessarily involve an admission of guilt. They stipulate to a penalty, basically. I know I'm using the word to define the word, but the best way to say it is they agree to a mutually acceptable resolution in lieu of going forward with a further investigation and further proceedings. Because you know, the initial investigative power of the division is significant, but obviously the licensee could take this further into our court system if necessary, or if they desire to push the issue of whether or not they violated the particular provision. So the parties both decide it's better to stipulate and agree upon a mutually acceptable resolution.
Yeah, so the division will gather up evidence, you know, whether that's screenshots, if it's advertising, or complaints in which they receive, copy of contracts, poor written addenda, settlement statements that didn't have numbers that were adequately disclosed, a variety of evidence, and then they bring this to the agent that's in violation and say, look, we've got all of this evidence against you. All right, we could go further with this, or you could agree to settle or stipulate on a fine and penalty, and that's what they push the agent to do. All right, so when you read these, it's always bigger than, typically. I mean, right, Mark? I mean, it's more than what you're reading, right? It's very rare an agent would stipulate on something with not the compelling evidence against them. Rare.
No.
All right.
Potentially, yes. We don't have all the background. We just have a small paragraph here. We don't know what the investigation actually showed.
All right, let's do the first one. I think it should be the principal broker Ogden, Utah, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I did actually pull that out.
Yeah, you did? Okay. All right.
Principal broker, Ogden, Utah, in a stipulated order dated September 20, 2023, Mr. Caldwell admitted that he advertised land for sale and that the advertisement did not accurately reflect the amount of property intended to be sold. In violation of Utah law and administrative rules, Mr. Caldwell agreed to pay a civil penalty of $1,000 and to complete 3 hours of continuing education, in addition to his other requirements. So he got fined, I'm assuming, for saying theoretically 5.1 acres for sale when it was 5.9 or 4.6 or something to that degree. Do you
the amount of the property intended to be sold. Now, why would an agent want to have an advertisement where there was a lot of acreage being sold for a small price? Why in the world would an agent want to do that? Come on. See, this is where I can laugh at my own jokes. I can self-entertain. You know, these are those moments where it really comes out. See, I read this and go, I wonder what the price was.
I think in order for you
200
to
acres that was being offered.
Yeah, I think in order for you to get a complaint submitted to the state, it has to be egregious. Like, it wasn't 5.2 acres and he was advertising 5.3. Like, that didn't happen.
That's right, Mike. That's right. And Tara's right. It's their lead generation system. Yeah, keep the phone ringing. You know what else is? I'll just read between the lines here. Someone called them out on it and said, hey, you need to fix that. So do you think they fixed it when they became aware of their human error and their clerical error? Nope. They let it ride because it's a great lead generation system. That's why they got fined, because they did it intentional. We can all make mistakes in this stuff. If we find them, look, if we become aware and we immediately make the edit and change, I think we're in the safe zone.
Yeah, I think so too.
But if we let it ride, not so much.
We have a question in the comment. Kimberly, take it away.
Thanks. I see these. I'm looking for multi-property for a client, and I find 3 that are under a certain price range, which will fit him. But all of them, or I think there's 4, say must be sold with these other 3 properties. And is there nothing wrong with that? Is that completely okay? I just see it. I seem to see it a lot, and trying to be effective and quick. And then I go, oh, here's one for 300,000. Oh, wait, you have to spend $1 million in order to buy it, because you have to buy 3 other properties, and they're all separate properties.
Yeah, I know what you're referring to, and I think this is one of the limitations and a quirk of our MLS system. So our MLS system requires individual listings for each individual tax ID, And so it's really difficult for an agent to say, hey, listen, there's 6 acres here with a home, but there's 4 tax IDs. It's really difficult to just enter that and sell it because you have to somehow include those other tax IDs. So they're forcing your hand to put those other tax IDs on the MLS as well. And it doesn't fit the cookie cutter mold and creates that confusion.
It's a good answer, Marc.
That makes sense, but in this case, they are completely separate properties. Like they are not even in the same streets. Still same answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see that the idea is different, but it still goes back to that problem. Like, hey, very rarely will someone say, hey, I've got 4 properties spread across Davis County, and I'm not selling them unless I sell them all together. That happens. It's rare. And so the MLS's system is just how it's going to be handled, I think. And it's a pain. Yeah. And it almost always occurs with land, farm type stuff. But that's just a quirk of the system. Is just how it's got to ride. And I think, and even the pricing there is confusing. Like, there's an argument to be made that they should put, the total price for all 4 properties on each property in order to explain it. But then, there's also an argument made you individually price those, but then you got to pull out a calculator to figure out what the total purchase, like it's a hot mess. And really only, that's where LoopNet comes in. There's other different advertising platforms come in where you can be more descriptive of what you're trying to sell. Yeah, MLS doesn't fit all things well. Most things well. All right, answered that. I'll move on to Mr. Flanders, and I did not make that. It's not The Simpsons. His last name is Mr. Flanders. Centerville, Utah, on a stipulated order dated September 20, Mr. Flanders admits that he represented a buyer in making multiple offers to purchase real property without first obtaining a written agency agreement in violation of Utah administrative rules. Mr. Flanders is forking over $4,000 and taking an entire CE class in addition to his regular requirement.
Yeah, this is one of those ones. Will, I think this is a stipulated order. I think there's more behind this than we're getting in this little paragraph here. That's a pretty egregious penalty, but this is also consistent with what we heard at the IDW workshop. The division is very keen on cracking down on agency violations. The lack of agency established. We're one of those few states that there's about 12 of us. 12 states that require written agency agreements, and the division is very serious about it. And this fine reflects that. One of the first things that I think it was Katie at the IDW workshop, the lead investigator, Katie Wright. One of the first things she mentioned that they look for, and when there's any sort of allegation or violation suggested by a buyer or seller, they ask if the agent established agency. Was there agency in this transaction? So this reflects how serious the division is about it. But there's more going on here because that's a pretty steep fine.
Yeah, that's big. I read these newsletters pretty thoroughly just to gather content for our thing. So I've been doing this for quite some time, and anything above a couple grand is usually a pretty big fine in this area, which leads us to Mr. Prince, sales agent, Layton, Utah, in a stipulated order dated again September 20. Mr. Prince admits that he violated Utah administrative rules. Mr. Prince had agreed to represent as a limited agent both the buyer and seller in a property transaction. The seller was an entity owned and operated by Mr. Prince. However, Utah Administrative Code prohibits a licensee from acting as a limited agent in a transaction in which the licensee is either buyer or seller, or if the licensee has an ownership interest or is an officer, director, partner, manager, or stockholder of an entity that is a principal in a transaction. An aggravating factor considered by the Real Estate Commission is that Mr. Prince has a record of prior discipline with the Real Estate Commission. Mr. Prince agreed to a civil penalty of $5,000 and to complete 6 hours of continuing education. I've seen this a lot where principals become limited agents, but this one is worded differently. Usually they have, they have their standard fare. This is what you did wrong, and they have their standard language. This language is new because I bet you this offender here said, well, I was a officer or director or partner or a manager or a stockholder, or tried to frame it in some way that he didn't have any ownership or any equity or anything related. He just had a title, or so to speak, because this is extra language. Yeah, I don't, this one happens at least a dozen times a year. There's a fine. Almost every probably month they're fining somebody for being a limited agent in their own transaction. And should seem obvious. So I like that fine amount.
So this triggers a bunch of different thoughts for me, but let me give you a twist on the scenario. So your client, so let's say you have a listing and you have a buyer you've been talking to, and let's just say they're $100,000 off. And boy, you sure feel bad for this buyer, and you've been, they just sure love this property, and you're like, hey, you know what? Why don't I just loan you the money? And I'll just put a lien on there, and you guys can pay me. Mark, could we sleep at night without that going on? I know this sounds crazy, but a lot of our hearts are in the right place, but this is very much well, Mark, why don't you answer? Why is this so similar to this you have interest in, another entity owned, and there violates the rules of limited agency? Why is loaning money in this situation very much the same?
Well, the agent that's loaning the money has an interest in the transaction by virtue of, and they have an interest in the property by virtue of the loan. They file a lien against the property, a deed against the property. We had this exact scenario in our brokerage as an E&O claim not too long ago.
Yep.
The agent giving a loan to a buyer has adverse interest to their buyer, who is their client. So now they are, I don't know how they can observe their fiduciary duties, because they're looking out for themselves. The agent is looking out for themselves as a lender. So it certainly presents a lot of fiduciary duty issues, but it also, more to our point, the agent is acting as a principal in the transaction, the principal being a financier.
Hey, I'm so sorry to keep talking on this call, guys.
We love it, Travis.
This comes up in my world so often, of gosh, well, can this person or this party to the transaction create a second lien position behind your first? And that way we can do, Fannie Freddie, 80% financing it. Guys, and this is as simple as I can make it. If you have a vested interest in the transaction, the answer is no. It's that simple. It's vested interest in the transaction. So sorry, Joe, get quick on the mute button and mute me.
I think that's great. Thank you, Travis.
Here's a good question that contributes to this conversation. What about a listing agent making repairs, spending money, and using their own efforts to improve a property? Would that be different?
They say, hey, you can just pay me back when it closes.
Well, now you have a vested financial interest in the transaction.
We're right back where we are. And the reason I said your heart's in the right place, because most of the time our agent is just trying to help.
Right.
Oh, and they have the means to bridge the gap. But the trouble with that, of course, guys, is that it puts us in a violation of the rules of limited agency. We do become invested, and it changes the dynamics of it entirely.
And Will, I'm going to jump on the big heart scenario. In all of my examples, not one time has it ever been malintent. It has always been to help a buyer or a seller or an elderly person, etc. Always with a big heart.
Just to be clear, Tara, I think the defining line to your question is if you expect compensation for those repairs. Is that correct, Mark? Will?
Yes, if you're going to be compensated for the repairs, yes.
Yeah. So Steve, yeah. So that's where I wanted to make that comment, Steve, is yeah. So the defining line area is if you're making repairs and expecting to be compensated for those things, yeah, that's kind of a problem. I guess if, you know, if we're making arrangements and the seller's paying for stuff, that's normal everyday occurrence.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
So I lost a listing because I would not replace furnaces, AC units, carpeting, flooring, painting. Because I was just like, I walked away, and the person that I lost the listing to was a broker from another, and I was just like, I don't think you could legally do that. Don't think if you have a vested interest and you're going to be paid at the end of the transaction for those repairs, I don't know that you can do that.
I think we are confusing limited agency with a business decision. Mark, do you want to clarify that? There's not a violation of you becoming a vested person in the sale of the property, but it is a violation if you intend to be any kind of representation of the buyer in the transaction. I don't want to put a green stamp. I don't want to put a stamp of approval on our agents going out there and, you know, replacing furnaces and carpets and things like that in property. And I'm not saying that at all, but that's the nature of the violation, is that you're invested in the seller's property. Therefore, you have an interest in the property. You cannot be an unbiased, neutral party for the other side.
That's right. And, you know, I'd argue whether or not you could observe if you take an interest in the property as a vested interest, financial interest in the property as a principal, and even if you disclose that, I'm not sure you're entirely capable of observing your fiduciary duties, even to that seller, because now you have a financial interest that needs to be compensated as well in the sale of the property. So you're basically business partners on the property. You become business partners on the property. So I'm not sure you can fully observe your fiduciary duties.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to add here too. I do know that there are services out there that will actually pay for these repairs if they're major, and then I don't even know how they handle it. They do promissory notes or whatever, but I am aware of a few services that will give the seller or arrange for these repairs to be done and take that on and expect to be paid at closing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are agents that are willing to do that for small amounts of money, but Tara, I don't think you lost the listing. You successfully avoided a listing, I think is the correct.
I agree.
Right.
So you didn't lose anything. You gained sleep and you feel better about yourself. So
yes. Mike, can I make one point about Mr. Flanders going backwards?
yes, please do.
You jumped to Mr. Prince very quickly on me. But Flanders, remember, was the one we talked about that represented a buyer in making multiple offers.
Yeah.
Purchase real property without first obtaining a written agency agreement. We've been talking about this a lot lately, the importance of buyer broker agreements, and recognize here that there's two requirements under the rules. One is that you establish agency. And then in the REPC, we confirm that previously established agency. He was probably in the REPCs, maybe confirming agency, but he never established that agency in the first place. Right. Very important. There, you know, a lot of times newer agents will think that we can establish agency in the REPC. We're not doing that. We're confirming the agency that was established in this instance, or should have been established in a buyer broker agreement. Sorry,
and
that's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, and the timing of it is the violation about when it happened. They didn't happen prior. And
right.
We are with digital signatures and the way that evidence can quickly be gathered, it's pretty clear. You either had it signed prior or you didn't. If you got it signed after, you're in violation. And right. That will be held over the head of the agent. I think a lot too, another layer here is we're not even talking about the agent's expense of getting of their own attorney or the legal effort that's behind the scenes to keep the agent out of whatever trouble they were in. We're only getting a little, snippet of this. So when you see something like $4,000, maybe you think, well, that's not so bad. Well, that's just the division. That has nothing to do with the costs and the time and effort that the agent went through There have been a few cases that we have been involved in where the attorney's bill that we found out was $25,000 that the agent had to take on. This was we became privy to something that was outside of happened and occurred prior to their being an agent at Brookshire. So just keep in mind, we're only seeing what the division's fine is, not any of the other costs the agent incurred to protect themselves against the mounting evidence that the division had. So what do you do if you inadvertently made a human error and you did not get the buyer broker agreement signed? You made you meant to, maybe even send it over digitally. Maybe it didn't come back for whatever reason, but you don't have it. What do you think the division would like us to do if we missed that and we made an error? And what do you think that Mr. Flanders was doing? Anybody? Anyone weigh in? What do you think Flanders did?
Probably backdating his buyer broker agreements.
Yeah, there we go. That's a
Doing
good
them
one.
by hand and sending them around for facsimile signatures. Covering his trail, so to speak.
Yeah,
Can I share a funny story?
sure.
Sure.
So 19 years ago, when I was a brand new agent and I got my very first buyer, and I was so excited, and I wrote the offer and got them under contract, and I walked the contract into my office and handed it to the secretary, and she said, "Awesome, congrats. Where's the buyer broker agreement?" And I said, "My what?" So it happens. That's how I learned on my very first transaction.
Whoops.
Whoops.
Well, look, this does come up. I think the answer is that we put something in the file, in the dot loop file, that says immediately upon the discovery of the lack of the obtaining a buyer agency agreement, we immediately sent over our buyer broker agreement. We can have the effective date, Mark, help me out here, changed, but we can never sign something and change the date. We only can sign it as to the date we are signing. Mark,
That's
can
right.
we have a buyer broker agreement that started, can it only be the day we executed, or could we say go back in time and say it started on, say, the 5th of January and not the 11th?
We can go backwards and say effective as of, but you're not changing the date that you actually signed it.
And that's the remedy to this. You know, what we never do, there's only one answer to what date do I put on this. It's today's date. There's only one answer to that.
That's right.
You know, we never put a different date. So there are ways to fix it, and the division's fine with that. It's the cover up, or it's the repetitiveness, or the lack of. And you know, when you did discover you didn't have one, what did you do? If we immediately went to rectify the problem, like, did we change the acreage on the advertising immediately upon discovering it was wrong? Yes. Show me that you did that. Oh, here's the email. Here's the edit. Here's the change. We did that. It's changed now. I remember one time I was on the phone with Katie, and she says, "Will, I'm looking at a KSL ad right now that still has it active, and this property is closed." I was like, okay. Well, now that I'm aware, I will immediately act. So, boy, in today's business, it's like everyone's business is open. You know, you can see it. You see their advertisings. You see digital signatures. It's pretty easy. Well,
Right.
this has been awesome, you guys. Any other?
Can I hit two of them real quick that we
Please,
that we didn't hit?
Yeah.
Well, there's two of them in the newsletter, and they both have to do with it's Amber Goldsberry and Don Stevens. Both of them have to do with advertising on social media or through electronic media, and did not include the name of the real estate brokerage with which they are affiliated. Two fines, each of them were $500, I believe.
Yep.
As we get, and as agents get more and more involved with social media and electronic advertising, there's a specific rule on this. It's in the administrative rules. It's rule 162-2F-401H. And that is the rule that each of these agents violated in not identifying their brokerage on the social media. There's if it's not reasonable, given the size of, whatever it is, if it's a TikTok or a Snapchat, or I'm not a social media person, so I don't know all those things, but my children are. But in any event, if it's not reasonable, given the size, or reasonable for any reason, not to identify your brokerage right up front on the front page, there is a kind of an exception where, as long as you directly link to a display that identifies your real estate brokerage, then that's okay. But it has to be unreasonable to not put it on the front page of the advertisement. So take a look at that. If you're involved in social media advertising, electronic media advertising, take a look at that rule 162-2F-401H and just make sure you comply with it each and every time you post something. I saw two of those, two instances of violations in this newsletter, so I figured I'd raise that one.
Mark, if I remember right, the administrative rule change was edited. I don't remember if it was just recent or just a few, but if I remember right, as long as they have a copy of the ad, it's a violation. There's no discussion. There's no work to stipulate. There's no settlement on it. It was just, there's the ad. It doesn't have the broker. It's an immediate $500 fine. Is that what I remember?
Well, I think as long as the exception doesn't apply, why wasn't it unreasonable? And I think that was the last IDW workshop we went to, not last October, the previous one. And I think the investigator was saying that it's almost always going to be reasonable to identify the brokerage on the front page. So
yeah, and we did on social, well, for social media specifically, we have recommended that all our agents tag Berkshire Hathaway Utah Home Services in their bios, and then that would satisfy all the requirements. And to Jill's question, which this is a good question, what if is it a video and a team does not mention their affiliation? I think if you're posting,
I think these are it's the TikTok stuff, like
yeah.
Right?
So if it's in your bio, no matter the real estate platform or whatever social media platform, I think you're covered, because then people can see, and if they want more information, they can click on it and see that you're immediately affiliated with our brokerage. So tag us in your bio on all those social media platforms and you're covered.
We don't get
I have
lot.
a comment, Mike.
Yeah, take it away.
Sorry, guys. I was
ahead.
wondering if you're doing like TikToks or Reels, stories, all the things. Show the Berkshire coats on that has the logo on it, or you have your name tag and it has the brokerage listed on it. Would that be sufficient?
You broke up a bit. I heard the clearest part I heard was the name tag in the video. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, if a name tag or a coat with your brokerage name listed on it would be sufficient if you had a live story or something going.
I don't even know that you need that. I mean, because if we go back to what our recommendation is, I don't think they expect every video to have, like, let's say, in your instance of a name tag, or like Marc's wearing, like, this is a good example. Let's look at Marc's jacket, which has our logo on it. Right now, I don't think anybody can make a claim that we know exactly what that logo says. But it's on the platform that we're looking on. If we could click, because, everybody's done it. They've seen a video of somebody and they go, who is this? We click on their tag and then we go see their bio immediately. And we see that it's at BHHS Utah. That's sufficient. Because I don't think they're requiring like a sign in the background or a watermark or anything like that. So, yeah, I think if you're a real estate agent and you're posting any content, anything related to real estate on your social media platform, you need to tag your brokerage in your bio, because it's just too dangerous not to.
Bob Stark said the one-click rule, but I think, Bob, the one-click rule is the old rule. It's not, that's not the rule anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is actually becoming a problem because of there's in the past 5 years, there's been a lot of different brokerage models, and some of these brokerage models do not care about being part of their advertising scheme. I mean, I've seen entire buildings branded with teams who belong to a brokerage, and the brokerage isn't on the building at all anywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's becoming a problem, and they need to, I mean, and by the way, the 500 is the new minimum. It used to be like 150 or 250. 500 is the new minimum for their first violation.
Well, all right. Hey, let's put a bow on this. So let's see. I've got one more little funny story for you guys if you want to hang on. Let me find it really quick. All right. So first of all, does everyone remember the word of the day?
Tranche.
It's a French word. Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, well, see, this will wear off on you. Just a little personal hit before we, well, do I want this recorded? Oh, fine. It could go unrecorded. That's fine. But I've been thinking about, I've had my F-350 truck for a while. I've been thinking about getting a new car. So I've been shopping, and it means I'm going to be getting rid of the family truck. So I sent out a message to my group family. This is my kids, my brother, sister, mom, dad, all that. It's in the Cooper text. Okay. Mark, you're going to love this. This was my notice to them. Attention, all beloved members of the Cooper family clan. The perk of truck access is about to be discontinued permanently. For those that may be in need of delivery or pickup services, please contact me immediately. We are sorry for any inconvenience this may cause. So you think this stuff doesn't rub off? And of course, I immediately got, Dad, no, I have to pick up, and I need some, and can you just, and you're like, but Dad, you need a truck. Don't you need a truck, Dad? And like, well, guys, I need to drive around and see everybody in the state of Utah. It's not the best thing to drive around. No, but you need a truck, Dad. So instantly they're like sending me pictures of trucks. And not to say it's not bad. Like, I've been driving a truck for 6 years. It's great. But watch how you talk, because your legalities will start to get into your vocabulary, will start to get into your discussions, like where you want to go to dinner. Well, do you want an exhaustive list of options to choose from? Is there a timeline? You'll say things like arguably.
Well, it'll get into all of your interactions, including without limitation, those with your spouse, your children, your coworkers.
As a truck owner, truth right there. It goes everywhere.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, hey, love you guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Huddle every week. Thanks, Mike, Mark, Travis. Thanks so much. All of you. Kim, thanks for being on. Kevin Larson joined us too. Thanks to all of our lovely agents. We love you guys. Make sure you're RSVPing for those meetings. Love to see you soon in person. So have a great rest of your day.